Hey, what's up YouTube? This is a tutorial that has been requested a lot since I uploaded my audio visualizer tests onto YouTube. So, the reason it took so long was because I was waiting on a new microphone, and I finally upgraded from my USB Guitar Hero mic that came with Guitar Hero World Tour for the Xbox 360. It was a USB mic, so it served me well for a little while, but I finally upgraded to an AT2020. So now, hopefully my videos will sound a lot better. So, as with every After Effects tutorial, open up After Effects. And while that's opening, I'll go ahead and tell you that in order to complete this tutorial 100% exactly like I am going to do it, you will need Trapcode Suite, more specifically Trapcode sound keys. But you don't need it. You can probably complete most of this without it, but in order to get, if I can pull up a reference image here, this bass ring that kind of pumps with the bass drum and other bass wobbles and stuff, in order to get that working, you will need sound keys. So just keep that in mind. But everything else can be completed without it. So I'm going to be building us up from the bottom to the top. So first things first, drag in your audio and drag that into the comp. And now if you're not familiar with working with audio in After Effects, if you just hit play, it won't play the audio. The only way to get the audio is to RAM preview it. I am using the Trey Lewis remix of Zomboy's Here to Stay. The link will be in the description, and also a link to his Soundcloud. Unfortunately, he took it down as he wanted to change his styles, so his Backlog uploaded to my downloads website. So next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to add a solid, and we're going to name this gradient. And then we're going to add a 4-color gradient to it. So just start typing in gradient, and 4-color gradient will come up, so drag that over. Now, we don't want these colors, so change the first two to black. And then we're going to select a color for the third one that's more of a darker teal, or darker cyan. Maybe about that. That looks about good. And then we're going to copy the hex value, and we're going to paste it in the next one. Now, I would recommend keeping this hex value copy and pasteable, because you will be using it a lot throughout this tutorial as everything is around the same color. Now, next thing, we're going to drag in our stars image. So drag that into your comp, and then I guess we have to go back over to projects and drag that in on top. Now, this is just a picture I pulled off of Google. This will be in the project files that will be downloadable in the link's description. So, as you can see, this is more of a red tint, and we're going towards a blue-greenish theme. So, we're going to add a hue and saturation to it. And then we are going to just nudge the hue a little bit. I found plus 52 works well for this. So about here, it's sort of orangey, greenish. It's a really nice color, I like it. So about there. And then we are going to add a mask to it. So right click on stars, go up to mask, and add a new mask. And then we are going to drag this down about halfway. And then we're going to go into the mask settings, and under the shape, I'm going to set the left to -2000 and the right to 3000. This should just give us wide, because what we're going to do is we're going to feather it, and we don't want the sides feathering. So feather this up a decent amount, and then tick the inverted checkbox, so it's like this. Now under the gradient, we're going to go under transform, and we're going to lower the opacity to something more along the lines of maybe 20%. Actually that's way too dark. Let's up it a little bit. Let's change the color. It should be a little more greenish. More like that. That's the color we want. So, copy and paste that. And don't be afraid to edit the mask a little bit. Like, I'm going to drag this mask a little bit further up, and then hit shift and once you're dragging, you have to hit shift and hold shift to drag it straight up. So we want it about halfway like that. And then we are going to lower the opacity of our stars image, so it just gets a little darker. I'd say that's about good. Now we're going to add the waveform that's in the background, the little line that bounces back and forth. So add a new layer, a new solid. We're going to name it waveform. And over to the right, we're going to start typing in waveform. And under generate, we're going to drag over an audio waveform into the effects. So as you can see, it's not stretched across the full image, this purple line. So we're going to want to set this to 0 for the start point, and then 1920, or whatever your composition width and height is. And as you can see, now it stretches across the entire image. And we don't want this purple, so we're going to paste our hex value that we copied from earlier into the hex box. And now we get this blue line. Now if you go up to audio layer, we're going to change the audio layer to our audio that we want it to react to. Now under displayed samples, we're going to change that to 145, and that will allow us more points. As you can see, if I up this, it becomes a little smoother, and if I lower this, it becomes more jagged. So I found 145 works well for this in most cases, although that you can alter that however you want. Now the maximum height changes the height of it, so we are going to change the maximum height to around 210 maybe. That looks good. Maybe a little more. And then we are going to change the duration to 125. Make sure it's set to 125. We are going to change the thickness to about 3, which is already set there. And then we're going to change the softness to 0. That's the blurriness of a line, and we want a very sharp line. As you can see, it works well as it is. And make sure waveform options is set to mono, not the left or right channel, and the display options is set to analog lines. Although you can change this to digital or analog dots if you want to, but in my example I used analog lines. Now we are going to add the sidebars, so the little audio spectrums that are on the left and the right hand of the screen. So, don't add new light, add new layer or solid. Name this sidebar left, and then we are going to add a audio spectrum, and we're going to change the color like before. And now audio spectrum's a little different. Instead of it giving you the temporary waveform, it gives you the spectrum of the audio, so the lows and the highs, instead of just the shape of the audio wave. So in order to get the audio we want, as you can see, there's a little bit of dots. If we turn off the waveform, we can see those dots. That is our audio spectrum. So change the audio layer to our song. As you can see, it's sort of working, but as before, it's not the width we want it. But we don't want it the width of our composition. We want it from top to bottom. So we are going to change the X to 0 on both of it. And then we are going to change the bottom to 1080. And then we are going to change the top to 0. And as you can see, now it's vertically aligned. Now our start frequency, I'm going to set this to 80 because that's going to crop a little bit of the stuff we don't want. And then the end frequency, we're going to leave at 2000. And then the frequency bands, we want to turn this up a little more to about 80, 90. I'm going to leave it at about 85, 87. And then I'm going to turn the maximum height all the way up to 200 or 2050. So if I change this to 2050, you can see it sticks out a little bit more. Now the thickness we're going to change to around 10, so that way we can actually see it. And then we're going to change the sharpness down because we don't want it all blurry. If we listen to this, okay, well, I have this inverted. So instead of this being 1080 and this 0, we're going to change this to 1080 and this to 0. We want the bases on the bottom just because it makes sense. The lows will be low and the highs will be high. Now, if we leave this at side A and B, the side we're not using won't be shown, and then we can just literally copy and paste this to the right side. But there's one more thing we have to do, and that's change the hue interpolation. So turn off color symmetry, and we're going to lower the hue interpolation a little bit, just so it gets green on top and it's blue on bottom, similar to our color scheme gradient in the background. And then you're going to select sidebar left layer and hit Control D, and that'll duplicate it. And that'll allow us, to take these values, the start point and end point, and set these both to 1080. I'm sorry, not 1080, 1920, or the width of our composition. And boom, it's on the left side. We didn't have to change anything else. Just notice that these are two separate elements. You could pre-comp it and change it and copy the pre-comp, but doing it this way, you will have, if you make a change, you will have to change both sides individually. But now that we have the sidebars, we can start to work on the bass kick. Now you will need sound keys for this, just to let you know. Now we're going to add a new solid. We're going to add this bass ring. Hit OK. And then we're going to right click, pre-compose, and hit OK. Because we are going to need to add some different effects. Now open the pre-composition and select the layer. And we're going to add a fill to it. This will allow us to just easily change the color. And instead of red, we are going to paste our hex value into the box. And then we are going to shrink this a little bit. And then we are going to add a mask. So right click, mask, new mask. And then, as before, we're going to set the mask shape, the left side to -2000. And then the right to 3000, just to give us a little width to work with. And then we're going to crank up the feather a lot, just to give us a little nice feathered ring. Now if we go back to the main comp, you can see it's just a line. Now to fix this, we're going to add polar coordinates to it. And if we turn up the interpolation to 100%, you'll notice it does this, which makes no sense. And that is because you have to change the type of conversion from polar to rectangle to polar. And now we have this ring. But you'll notice it's too small. Now, most people would scale this up, but because it's pre-comped, we're going to be losing a lot of detail and it's going to become pixelated. So, in the base ring pre-comp, we are going to, under transform, we're going to change the Y position, and we're going to move that down. The lower we move it, the bigger the circle gets. Now remember, this is going to be expanding, so you want the resting position, which is what we're setting now. You're going to want that to be a decent size. You don't want it to be clipping off the edge. Maybe a little bigger than this. Now once it starts booming and starts growing, we can have it clipping off the edge. But this is a decent size to start out with. Now we need the black circle to go behind it. So you're going to add a layer, new solid, and I'm going to title this black hole because it sounds cool and it's a black circle. So black hole. And now there's a really neat plugin. I'm going to drag that down under bass ring. There's a really neat effect called circle. This means if you just type in circle and drag it over, you don't have to mess around with masks. It just turns the layer into a circle. So make that circle black. Drag the radius up. I'd say a little smaller than the circle for now because we're going to be messing with feathering, so we're going to have to change it later anyways. And under feather, grow the feather a little bit to something about there, and then drag the radius back up. You don't want the feather to be coming beyond that blue circle. That's about good. Now, in order to make this move, we're going to have to add a new layer, so new solid, and I'm going to title this bass reader because it's going to read the bass. And then we're going to add trap code sound keys. Whoops, sound keys. There we go. I can't drag it over. Okay, now, if you've never used sound keys before, this will look really ugly to you. Don't worry, we're going to have this layer turned off in the final version. It just allows us to visualize what we're doing. So, under audio layer, select Zomboy here to stay, which is our audio. And if we play, you'll see the audio levels. So, find a spot where the red is kicking up, because that's our bass, that's our lower. So find where it gets really high, maybe right there. And we're going to drag the top left corner of this square to the top and to about here. And then we're going to drag the bottom right, and we're just going to outline those bass values. Just like this. And that's going to be our kicks, that's going to be your deep bass wobbles, maybe a little wider than this. Like that would be good. And then under range 1, we are going to change type to peak of range. And then we are going to change the fall off to instant. Make sure that's set to instant. Now, in order to make this grow, we're going to turn this off. And under the bass comp ring, or bass ring comp, under transform, we are going to click on scale, and under animation, up in the top bar, we're going to click add expression. And then we're going to take this make sure bass reader is selected, and take the pick whip and select output 1. Actually, before you do all this, make sure you hit apply, because that will generate the keyframes that is needed for this song. Okay, now, as you can see, the ring is moving like we want it to, but we're running into the problem of, because when the bass is 0, it's setting it to 0 scale. So it is very tiny, almost invisible, and we don't want that. So a way to fix it is to offset the value. So go down to the expression line, click on the expression line, and right before the semicolon, add a parentheses, and on the other side of this comp, add a parenthesis. That way it counts it all as 1. If you know JavaScript, this should be pretty simple to you, or any other language, C++. It's all pretty simple. And then we're just simply going to hit plus 100. This is going to make sure that the bass of the resting position is setting at 100% of the scale. So now you can see it's back, and when the bass kicks, now it grows, and it grows big. Now the black circle isn't growing with it, so that's a simple fix. Go to the black hole and take the parent pick whip and drag that onto the bass ring. Now you can see they're both growing. Now that the effect isn't complete. Now all we have to do is make it fade in and out just a little bit. It's a nice little effect. Now, in order to make it fade in and out, you're going to go under bass ring comp like we did before, and you're going to click opacity, and you're going to add another expression. Now, make sure bass reader is selected like before, and just like we did, drag the pick whip onto output. And it should open up the expression by default. Now, at the end of this, like before, add a parenthesis, and add a parenthesis before this. And just like before, you're going to hit plus 100, and then semicolon. What this will do is, this will make sure it's at 100%. Sorry, we don't want this at 100. We want this at about 20. So 20. Because we don't want this 100% opaque when it's at its rest state. So if we look at this now, we can see that when it bumps out, it gets a little brighter. And then it gets, it's hard to see. Here we go. It's one frame. It's very fast. So let's go frame by frame. You can see as it goes out, it gets brighter. And then as it goes in, it gets fainter. This is a really nice effect. That means when it's really pounding and you get the bass, it really looks like it's vibrating and really bright, and it adds a really nice effect to it. Now, one thing I forgot to turn on is turn back on the waveform. That way we can just see what we're doing. And it also, we can see the progress we've made. So, next thing we're going to add is the mid-range. Now, this is going to be the ring inside of the kick bass ring thing. So, as before, add a new layer. So, add layer new. And we're going to title this mid-range. And hit OK. And we're going to add another audio spectrum to it. Just like before, set this to 0. Set this to 1920. Set the colors to the hex we copy and pasted. Just like that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to change the start frequency to 100 because that's where the mid-range is, and then end frequency to 800. So that way we're just getting the mid-range. We're not getting the lows and we're not getting the highs like the hi-hats, and we're not getting the deep bass wub. So this is going to be more vocal range and mid synths and stuff. Now we're going to set the frequency bands to around 90. And before we do all this, add a polar coordinates to it. Just like that. And then change the interpolation to 100 and rect to polar. Now you'll notice this is a little too small, smaller than we want it. And like before, a lot of people would just scale it up, but we don't want to do that. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to the Y coordinates of the start points and end points, and you're going to adjust them until it's the width you want, and then you're going to change the other one to that same value. So I like 758, so I'm going to change this other one to 758, and now you can see it's a full circle again. Now we're also going to change the softness to 0, and we're going to change the thickness to 10. And now if you look at this, it does nothing because we have not selected our audio layer. Just like that. Now, as you can see, it's bouncing both sides. We only want the inside that's pointing inward, not the one that's going outward. So go down and change the side options to side B. Change that to side A. And now we get it pointing inward. But it's really shallow. It's not coming out that much. So you're going to want to change the maximum height to 250. That's a really good maximum height. That's the one I pretty much use for everything. And now we got our mid-range. Like I said, this is going to be more of your vocals. But if you look up here, the bass is at the top. And it doesn't make sense to have bass, the kick drums, which is what this is, just because I know this song. It doesn't make sense to have the bass at the top. It looks better, personally, I think, at the bottom. So we're just going to go down, and under transform options, we're going to change the rotation to 180 degrees. And that'll just put the bass at the bottom. Now, on to the next step, which is the 2 center rings. And these are the last steps. So, add a new layer, like before, and change this to center outer. And that's what we're going to name it, because this is going to be the skinny outer ring of the center core of our visualizer. So, as before, add in a audio spectrum. I cannot type today. Change the colors to our predefined hex value instead of this weird purple stuff that I don't know why they set it to that. Who would want purple? And add polar coordinates just like before. Drag and drop that. Interpolation 100. Now you could copy and paste this, but then you'd have to change other settings, and I don't like that. Now if you look, it's not a full circle. We got these dots, they're not completing the circle. So just like before, that's because we have not changed these. We have to set this to 0 and 1920. And now we have the full circle. And we're going to want to shrink this. So drag this in a bit to about there. And then adjust the other option to whatever value you determined. So this one's 316, 316. And then we're going to change the display options from digital to analog lines. Unlike the analog lines in the back, this will still be like an audio visualizer. It'll just be a line instead of a bunch of little individual lines. If we change the Zomboy or the audio layer to Zomboy, you can see sort of what this looks like. Now, we want the start frequency to be 250. This means we're not getting a lot of the deep kicks, but we're still getting everything else. And we're going to leave the end frequency at 2000. We're going to change the frequency bands up to 1000. This will smooth out everything we have. And then we're going to change the side to side B. And that's going to make sure it's coming out. And we're going to change the maximum height to 2050, like before. As you can see, it's starting to look really good. Now, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to change the thickness to 5, which just gives it a little extra visibility under all the other stuff that's moving. Let's see, that's it there. And now we can literally just copy and paste this. So under center outer, hit Control D, make sure that's selected. Hit Control D, and rename this to center. Center inner. And the only thing we're going to change, we're going to, well, first off, change the softness to 0 on both of these. I forgot to mention that. And then under center inner, we're going to drop the Y coordinates a little bit, just like before. 138, make sure it's 138 for both. And then we're going to change the display options to digital. Now, as you can see, this is solid. We don't want it to be a solid. Actually, yeah, let's drop this a little bit more to about 80. And then I'm going to shrink the center outer a little bit more, just to get it a little bit closer to my example that I used. Now, for this one, for the top one, we're going to go up here and we're going to set start frequency to 250, 200,000, just like before, or sorry, 2,000. And we're going to set the frequency bands to 1,000, and we're going to set the maximum height to 2600. As you can see, this will give it a little bit of extra overlay into the other one, so it gets a little closer, makes it look like it's really pushing that outer ring out like we want. And everything else is set the same. So we're done with this audio visualizer. If we do a RAM preview, we get I'd say that looks pretty good. So if you have any requests for future tutorials, leave them in the comments down below, and I will see you in 2 weeks as I will be getting back to my normal schedule.